So let's just jump right in. We're talking about graphic novels in the classroom. Are they a game-changing teaching tool, or are they just a distraction? Honestly, it's a huge debate, sparking some serious conversations, and today we're going to unpack all of it. Now, be honest. When someone says comics in school, is this the kind of thing that pops into your head? You know, the big kapow, sound effects, simple stories, maybe something you'd hide behind your real textbook. Yeah, that's a common view, but we're about to flip that on its head. Because what if this format, the graphic novel, isn't just for a quick laugh? What if it's actually one of the most powerful learning tools we have? Something perfectly suited to how students learn today, capable of boosting comprehension, memory, and even critical thinking. So here's how we're going to break it all down. First, we'll tackle the controversy itself. Then, we'll get into what we mean by a new kind of literacy. After that, we'll look at the actual proven benefits for students, address the real-world hurdles, and then wrap up with a practical guide for any educator out there. All right, let's start with the pushback. Why is this whole idea of using books with pictures getting people so fired up? Where does all the skepticism come from? The core fears really boil down to two main things. First, there's this concern that these books are just, dumbed down literature, that they don't have the depth for any real schoolwork. And second, there's this big worry that if kids get hooked on graphic novels, they'll just never want to pick up a regular book again. Okay, so to really weigh those fears fairly, we've got to make sure we're all on the same page. We need to understand what we're actually talking about, both the books themselves and the students we're trying to reach with them. So first off, a graphic novel is not just a really long comic book. The key thing here is that it tells a complete story, with a beginning, middle, and end, just like a traditional novel. It's a whole, self-contained work, whether it's fiction, a memoir, or even a piece of history. And this brings us to a really important idea called multimodality. It sounds a little academic, I know, but all it means is that we make sense of the world using more than just words. Think about it. Images, sounds, gestures. Graphic novels are the perfect example, blending pictures and text to tell a much richer story. And this connects perfectly to today's students, who a researcher named Mark Prensky calls digital natives. These are kids who've grown up swimming in a sea of internet, video games, and social media. Their brains are often wired to process graphics before text, which makes this format feel incredibly natural to them. Okay, so the theory is sound. It all makes sense on paper, but what about in a real classroom? Does it actually work? Let's dig into the data and see what the research really says. So what happens when you actually use these in a class? Well, a major review of a bunch of different studies found 5 consistent key advantages. Students showed better comprehension, their motivation to read shot up, their critical thinking skills got sharper, they picked up more vocabulary, and it was a huge help for English language learners. Now, to really see this in action, let's zoom in on one specific study. Researchers worked with a group of middle school English language learners. They had them read parts of a story in 2 ways. Once in the traditional novel format, and once as a graphic novel. The results for understanding the story? They were absolutely stunning. Just look at this chart. Every single student, yep, all 7 of them, scored higher when they read the graphic novel version. Not some of them, not most of them, all of them. And it wasn't just about understanding the story in the moment. The researchers also tested how well the students remembered the details of the story a full 24 hours later. And again, the graphic novel was the clear winner. The kids remembered way more of what they had read. So what does that boil down to? This number right here. On average, students remembered almost 17% more of the story from the graphic novel. I mean, that's a massive improvement. It shows just how powerful those visuals are for locking information into our brains. But of course, it's not quite that simple. To be fair, we have to talk about the real-world hurdles. We need to address the totally legitimate challenges and concerns that teachers face when they try to bring these books into their schools. So let's just tackle those early fears head-on. The idea that they're too simplistic? Well, award-winning graphic novels like Moss and Persepolis explore incredibly complex themes like the Holocaust and the Iranian Revolution. The fear they'll replace the classics? The research actually shows they often work as a gateway, getting reluctant readers excited enough to try traditional books. And what about inappropriate pictures? Well, that just boils down to choosing the right book for your class, which is true for any book, right? You know, this quote from a scholar named Hansen really hits the nail on the head. He suggests that a lot of the criticism just reveals a dislike for new things rather than a thoughtful critique. It points to this really human tendency to resist things that are different from how we learned. Okay, so let's say an educator is on board. They're convinced. and they want to give this a shot. How in the world do they do it right? Let's move to a practical guide for unlocking the real power of these books. One of the biggest hurdles you hear from teachers is that they just don't know how to teach a graphic novel. They were never trained for it in college. But here's the good news. As these books become more common, experts are developing really clear, practical strategies. The research points to a really simple two-part approach. First, you have to teach visual literacy itself. How do you read an image for meaning? And second, you give them the vocabulary, the key terms like panels and text boxes, so they have the right language to actually talk about what they're seeing. And that really brings us to the most important point of all this. The goal here has never been about throwing out Shakespeare and putting in superheroes instead. It's about recognizing that we live in a super visual world, and we need to add a powerful new tool to the literacy toolbox. And so that leaves us with one last big question to chew on. As our daily lives become more and more of a blend of text and images, from websites to social media, are graphic novels not just some fun alternative, but actually essential training for what it really means to be a reader in the 21st century?